ZilckSound.
You're tuned into ZilckSound, where business gets real, trends get broken down, and you walk away sharper than when you hit play. Brought to you by Zilck.com. Practical news for the modern entrepreneur. Now, here's your host, Rob Henley.
Welcome to ZilckSound. I'm Rob Henley. Thank you for listening to us. The team and I were talking about being entrepreneurs, what's the cost, and how much we've sacrificed so far. However, this isn't another voice telling you to keep grinding, stay in the game, trust the process. And this definitely isn't going to end with a framework for beating the odds. What this is a conversation about a number, one statistic, a number you've heard so many times you probably stopped hearing it altogether. And here it is, 90% of startups fail. You've seen it in pitch decks. You've heard it at conferences. Someone drops it into conversation like it's weather, just the way things are. And the subtext every time is the same. The default outcome is failure, and you're probably going to join it. I've been thinking about this number for a while, and here's where I landed after a lot of discussions with friends and colleagues. The statistic isn't wrong, but what it's doing to people who believe it, that's something else entirely. A few years ago, I shut something down. It was a venture I'd been building for about 18 months. A small team, decent traction. Revenue was real, not life-changing, but real. And one Tuesday afternoon, I sat down, looked at the numbers, looked at the runway, looked at the version of the next 2 years I could actually see, and I decided to stop. I told myself the same things you tell yourself. The market wasn't quite there. The unit economics would take too long to fix. The timing was off, all of which was true. But here's what I didn't say out loud. Not to my co-founder, not to my partner, not to myself. At 11 p.m., staring at the ceiling, I stopped because it wasn't looking like the thing I'd imagined. It was working slowly, messily, not glamorously, but it was working, and I killed it anyway. I folded that venture into the statistic, 90% fail. Look, I'm one of the 90%. It's almost comforting when you put it like that. The math was never on my side. It wasn't my fault, except that's not quite right. The business didn't fail. I made a decision. Those are not the same thing. The 90% of startups fail statistic comes from a few different sources, depending on who's citing it. The commonly referenced study tracked businesses over time and categorized outcomes. But here's what the category failure actually includes in that data. It includes businesses that closed because the founder ran out of personal savings. It includes businesses that were acquired for small amounts, not home runs, not even doubles, but transactions where someone said, "I'll take this off your hands." It includes businesses where the founders simply stopped, lost interest, changed direction, moved to a different city, had a kid, got a job offer, decided the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. And it includes businesses like mine, the ones that were working but didn't look like success was supposed to. The statistic flattens all of these into one word: failure, bankruptcy, market collapse, founder exit, strategic shutdown, burnout, boredom, a better opportunity somewhere else, a decision made at a kitchen table at 2 a.m. All of it, failure. Now here's what Zilck has written about this. The problem isn't the data. The data is what it is. The problem is what happens when you take all of that complexity and compress it into a single terrifying number that people carry around like a diagnosis. When you believe the default is failure, you start reading every hard month as evidence. Revenue dips. See, the statistic was right. Co-founder tension, it's happening. You've heard about this. This is how it starts. You begin looking for confirmation that the thing is dying, not because you want it to die, but because the statistic told you it probably would, and humans are wired to resolve uncertainty, even if the resolution is bad news. At least it's news. The theory isn't the issue. The issue is the weight. Let me give you a specific example that isn't mine. A founder I know, I'm not going to name him, but he'd recognize himself in this, spent 4 years building a company. It wasn't a venture scale rocket ship. It was a business. It made money. It employed 12 people. It solved a real problem for real customers who paid real invoices. But every time he looked at it, he saw something that didn't match the picture in his head. The growth curve wasn't steep enough. The valuation conversations weren't happening. The tech press wasn't calling. The statistic was whispering in his ear, "You know how this ends." So he sold it. Not for nothing, but for less than he'd put in if you count the years. And the acquirer, they still run it. It's still growing, still profitable, still employing people, still serving customers. That business didn't fail. He just decided it wasn't enough. And there's a real difference between those two things, a difference the statistic doesn't allow you to make. Here's what makes this hard to talk about. I'm not criticizing his decision. He made the right call for himself at that moment with the information he had, with the life he wanted to live. That's not failure either. What I'm saying is the statistic gave him permission to stop looking at what was working and focus entirely on what wasn't. It gave him a script. Most fail, I'm most. This is normal. And the script felt true because the script is everywhere. However, here's what it actually was. The statistic isn't a prediction. It's a story we tell ourselves to make closure feel like math. When you say 90% of startups fail, what you're really saying, what the listener hears, is the outcome is outside your control. The market decides, the timing decides, the algorithm, the investors, the economy, the luck, all of it decides. You're just here doing the work, waiting to find out which group you're in, but that's not what the data is measuring. The data is measuring decisions. Human beings, at specific moments, choosing to stop and lumping every one of those choices into a failure bucket that also contains actual bankruptcies, actual market collapses, actual externally imposed endings. That's not analysis, that's narrative, and it's narrative that serves a purpose. It lets you off the hook. If failure is the default, then quitting isn't a decision, it's just the math working itself out. It wasn't you, it was the odds. I don't think that's true, and I don't think you think it's true either. The founders who build things that last, the ones who survive past year 3, year 5, year 10, they're not the ones who picked the winning idea on day 1. They're the ones who knew which thing not to quit. They're the ones who could tell the difference between this isn't working and this isn't looking like I thought it would. That distinction between market failure and founder exit is one of the most important skills in business, and the statistic actively trains you out of making it. There's a version of this conversation that ends with, so never give up. I'm not doing that. Some things deserve to die. Some ventures are built on bad assumptions, bad unit economics, bad timing, or bad fit between the founder and the problem. Walking away from those isn't failure, it's clarity, it's the right call. And treating every shutdown as a moral failing is just the other side of the same broken coin. And the skill isn't persistence, the skill is knowing the difference. And the statistic, the 9 out of 10, the most fail, the quiet fatalism that runs through so much of how we talk about entrepreneurship, the statistic doesn't help you build that skill. It erodes it. It trains you to see every difficulty as the beginning of the end instead of just the middle. So here's what I'd ask you. If you strip the statistic away, if no one had ever told you that 90% of startups fail, if you'd never seen that number on a slide, if the ambient noise of entrepreneurial fatalism didn't exist, would you have made the same decision? Not should you have made the same decision. That's not the question. The question is, did the statistic make it for you? Because there's a version of quitting that's honest. You look at the thing, you look at yourself, you look at the life you want, and you choose. That's integrity. That's just being a grown-up who knows what they want. And then there's a version of quitting that's dressed up as inevitability, the market, the odds. In 9 out of 10, that version feels cleaner, but it's not cleaner. It's just avoidance wearing a blazer. At some point, the next right move is just a move. Not the right move according to the statistic, not the safe move, not the move that looks like someone else's success story, just your next move. It made with whatever information you actually have, not whatever fear the number gave you. The fact that you're still thinking about it at 11 p.m. doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you actually care, and it's worth carrying on. This is all for tonight. Thank you for listening. If this landed, if it made you think about something you'd stop thinking about, let us know your thoughts on social media. I read what comes back. It matters. I'm Rob Henley, and this is ZilckSound. See you on the next one.
ZilckSound. ZilckSound.